Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Alicia and I'm going to talk about the books I read in April and May. So in April I read 14 books and in May I read 22 books, which brings me to a total of 36 books to talk about today. The first book I'm going to talk about is In the Shadow of the Sun King by Golden Keyes Parsons. And we are in the 17th century and we are following Madeline and her family, and they are Huguenots, and right now the Huguenot faith is being persecuted for what they believe in. And we are also following King Louis XIV, and he has sent some dragoons to survey the area, and these dragoons end up at Madeline's house and they end up taking over. And so Madeline and King Louis XIV, when they were very little, they were friends. And so Madeline thinks this is very unfair, and so she's talking to these dragoons and she's like, I know what King Louis was like. This is just a big mistake, and like he would never do this. And so she ultimately goes to King Louis XIV to tell him what is happening, and based on that is where the rest of the story comes from. And I enjoyed it, but it was a very heavy story. The next book I read was The Second Woman, and it is by Louise Mey, and in this book we are following this lady named Sandrine, and one day she is watching the news and there's this man on TV and his wife has gone missing, and she really feels sorry for him, so she ends up striking a friendship with this man and his son, and they eventually start a relationship. And this man's wife, who is missing, later shows up, and Sandrine is forced to confront the truth about this man. The next book I read was What's Mine and Yours by Naima Coaster, and in this book we follow two families. So we're in North Carolina, and there are students coming to this high school from the Black East side of town, and they are coming to a predominantly white high school. And the people at this high school, there are two sides. They either think it's a really great idea, or they think, like, I don't know why these kids should have this opportunity. So we follow G, and G has just recently experienced a loss, and his mother is wanting the best possible outcome in life for him. So she thinks it's a really great opportunity that he can go to this school as a young Black man. And on the other side, we follow Noelle, and her mom, Lacey, is very much against the Black people coming to the school. We then see G and Noelle's life meet, and they end up joining the school play together, and we begin to see how these two disconnected families will have to come to terms with each other, and then we also get to see into their adult lives as well. The next book I read is Stationery Shop by Marjan Kumali. I really love Marjan Kumali's writing, so this is why I wanted to pick up this book. I read The Lion Woman of Tehran a few years ago. So in this story, we follow Roya and Bauman, and there are two kids, and they end up meeting in this stationery shop. And Roya is this dreamy, idealistic teenager living among the political upheaval in Tehran in 1953, and she just finds some solace and some peace in this stationery shop, so she likes to spend her time there. Then there is Bauman, who comes and gives these letters to the stationery shop owner. The stationery shop owner sees that Roya and Bauman have some chemistry between the two of them, so he introduces them, and they start a relationship. And this book was just so fascinating and interesting, following their relationship, because they come from two different social classes, and it's just was so interesting to watch. Roya and Bauman eventually decide to get married, and Bauman tells Roya to meet her at the town square, but there is a a lot of violence happening there that night because of the political upheaval, and Roya is unable to find Bauman. So Roya tries to get in contact with him, and she's unable to, and so Roya just decides to move on with her life. She marries someone else and moves to America and just literally moves on with her life. And then about 60 years later, she accidentally runs into Bauman, and she has all these questions for him. So then the story is taking us through like what happened during their relationship, and I just loved this book so much. The next book I read is The Tiger's Wife by Theo of Golden, and this is about a girl named Natalia, and her grandfather has recently passed away, and she is searching for clues for her grandfather's final state of mind. So she turns to the stories he told her when she was a child. On their weekly trips to the zoo, he would read to her from a worn copy of Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book, which he carried with him everywhere. Later, he told her stories of his own encounters over many years with the Deathless Man, a vagabond who claimed to be immortal and appeared never to age. And so, as Natalia is going through these memories in her mind, she is the story just goes like from like their weekly time together with her grandfather, and then the stories that her grandfather told her. And I thought the book was really well written, and it had great imagery. Those were my two things that I loved about the book. The next book I read was Paint and Nectar by Ashley Clark, and we have two timelines. The first one is in 1929. We are following Eliza and William. Eliza is a famous painter, and William has been hired to forge Eliza's paintings. But in order to do that, he needs to get close to her, and Eliza seems to really like William, but her aunt tells her to stay away from William because there has been an ongoing feud between their family for generations and generations. Eventually, they do fall in love, and William has to make the decision of whether he is going to stay in love with Eliza or if he is going to steal her paintings. And then in present day, we are following Lucy, and she has just inherited a large mansion from a mysterious benefactor. It's basically anonymous. The person didn't want her to know who it was, and she has inherited everything in the house, including its secrets and silver heirlooms. And so Declan is determined to buy this house because his father thinks there is something really special about the house, and he is determined to find it in the house. Lucy is very much into history and does not want to give up the house, so we follow Lucy and Declan as they are at odds with each other and seeing how the story goes, with one not wanting to sell the house and the one being told, do whatever you can to get this house. And I just thought this was a really incredible story, and I really enjoyed it. The next book I read was The Mediterranean Wall by Louise Philippe de Lambert, and this is a story, and we follow three women from different religions and cultures and nations: Nigeria, Somalia, and Syria. And the writer of the book depicts these three women, and they eventually bond together in their mutual struggle to escape Europe. The next book I read is My List, My Rules by Angie Cunhos, and Angie has decided to make a list of 101 things that she'd like to accomplish in the next year. Basically like a bucket list, but not over a lifetime, just over a year. And she got the idea from her friend, who said that her friend and her husband were going to do a list of 101 things they wanted to do in a year. And so she decided she was going to do that, so she made a list, and then she told her friend about it, and then her friend was like, yeah, we're not doing that anymore because you have to do something like every 3 days. And so I just really enjoyed it. I personally know Angie, so it was really fun reading along and trying to guess who people were, and just the format of the book. I really liked that she went in months, because then it was like, in this month, these are the things she did. And so that was just really interesting. Some of the things that she wrote on her list were hold a tarantula, spend a day saying yes to everything, spend a day saying no to everything, paint a masterpiece on a unique surface, and fly first class. And I would highly recommend this book. I really enjoyed it. The next book I read is Share Your Stuff, I'll Go First, 10 Questions to Take Your Friendships to the Next Level by Laura Tremaine. So basically what this book is, it's kind of like to go deeper in your friendship. So there's 10 different sections. I gave the book back to the library a long time ago, so I don't have it anymore. So Laura poses a question, and then she answers the question in multiple different ways, and then she leaves space for you to think about your answer and how you can have deeper friendships with people. So I just found it really interesting, all the different ways she found to answer the questions. The next book I read is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling, and I had never read Harry Potter before. As I'm speaking right now, I have finished the entire series and I loved it so much, but up until the end of May, I had only finished book 6. So that's about as far as I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to go in detail through every book. I just want to talk about Harry Potter in general. So like I said, I had never read Harry Potter before. For the reason is, I thought it was scary. And so one day I was with a group of people and I had to read a portion of a book, and this portion of a book was Harry Potter, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll read it, kind of thing. And so the portion that I ended up reading was from the first book, and it was where Harry gets this invisibility cloak and he finds his way to this mirror, and in this mirror what you see is the things you most want in life. And I just thought that was like so incredible. I'm like, this isn't scary at all. I need to read these books. And that was like 2 or 3 years ago. And I just finally got around to starting them in April, and I'm so glad I did. They were all so good. I loved them so much. My favorite was The Prisoner of Azkaban. That one was really good. So I read the book and then I watched the movie, and I did that with all of them. And I found that the first 3 followed the movie quite well, but then the 4th, they kind of deviated from it. And so I just kind of missed some of the key things that I read in the books. Like, I'm like, oh, I wanted to see that, and oh, I wanted to see that. And so I've heard there's a Harry Potter series coming out on Netflix or something that's going to be about a decade. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays into the story or follows the books. Now, as for the scariness of Harry Potter, there are scary scenes, just like there are in any other movie or book, but not the whole book is not scary like I thought it was. It's just so fascinating and incredible to read about, and it was just so amazing. The next book I read is What You Are Looking For Is in the Library, and that is by Michiko Aoyama. And we are in this library, and we follow these people who are looking for something. And each visitor that goes to the help desk, each has different problems, and the lady at the help desk is able to sense what they need. We follow different people in different seasons of life and different careers. We follow a restless sales attendant who feels stuck at her job, a struggling working mother who longs to be a magazine editor, and it was just so interesting to see how Michiko, the author, wrote the story and just brought such compassion and growth into the characters through this story. The next book I read is A Prisoner of Versailles, which is the second book by Golden Keyes Parsons in the series of In the Shadow of the Sun King. And so that book follows what happened in the first book, so I won't say too much. But I did finish the second book, and then I was like, I should read the third book because I kind of want to know what happens. And then I started reading it, and it was kind of like a completely different thing than the first 2 books. So I'm like, the first 2 books are connected, and then if you start the third book, it's not really that connected until you get farther in, so I just ended up not reading that one. The next book I read was Eyes to See by Becky Keep and Tim Keep, and we follow this missionary couple, and this is about 30 years ago, and they recently had a son, and they are home visiting family, and Becky's mom notices something about her grandson Jesse's eyes, and so she thinks there's something wrong with him. So Becky ends up going to the doctor just for a routine appointment and brings it up, and then the doctor sends them to all these specialists, and then it turns out that Jesse has some kind of cancer in his eye. So we follow this story of God's faithfulness and him sustaining this family through this time of their son having cancer. And then I just want to share some things they said that stuck out to me. Later, as Tim and I prayed together in our room, we began to see that we had to keep what we knew about God right in the forefront of our hearts and minds. It wasn't going to be easy to see him in the messiness of all the details. We couldn't be carried on some lofty emotional feeling that God is sovereign. The reality of this situation crashed into our consciousness with blunt force, and our emotions were tenuous and untrustworthy. We would have to place our faith and feet firmly on what the Word of God says about who he is. This knowledge would be the only foundation for our faith and strength during the long days of waiting, uncertainty, and yes, sometimes fear that we would experience. This was no time to run, but this was time to face the future with the knowledge that we were not alone. As we entered the troubled world of cancer and met dozens of families dealing with long-term, life-altering disease, we noticed that too often they allowed the battle to define their very existence. Because of this disease, their most important relationships, left unattended, began to suffocate from the weeds of conflict and misunderstanding. Though it took quite some time, the Lord graciously taught my husband and me that our lives would be defined by what we chose to fix our gaze upon. If we would choose to make cancer our focus, then cancer would define us. And everything in our peripheral vision, God, each other, our children, and others, would die from neglect. People might say, oh look, there goes that poor family dealing with cancer, and just look at how it has wrecked their lives. But if we made God our focus, then our lives would be defined by him and his good purpose, and he would receive the glory. People would say, oh look, there goes the people whom God is helping, his grace persevering, his word purifying, his love nurturing, his presence beautifying, and his power sustaining in the furnace of affliction. What an awesome God they serve. Very often, the greatest healing is not a miraculous deliverance from disease, but rather the healing of one's heart. And then Becky shares a story about how the Lord healed Jesse's heart, and so I just wanted to read that. One evening, feeling claustrophobic in the small room, we decided to hook up his IV to a little red wagon and go for a stroll down the hall. At first, Jesse seemed to be having a good time and enjoying the outing. A few minutes into his wagon ride, however, he began asking the infamous questions. Mommy, am I going to be able to see on my birthday? When we answered him truthfully, he pressed on. What about Christmas? Will I be able to see then? And on it went until our barely 4-year-old son was a pitiful, sobbing bundle of anger, wailing over and over, I want to see, I want to see. Tim and I had tried hard to be strong. We had tried to placate him and say all the right things about God and heaven and Jesus, but we stood on this evening with nothing left to say. Each futile question asked by Jesse only intensified the brutal truth that we had given and depleted our emotional energy. Our hearts were shredded to bits. We were at the end of our human abilities to handle this for even one more moment. We stopped the little red wagon right there in the hallway, and fighting back tears, we began to pray. Tim gently placed his hand on Jesse's head while I cried out to the Lord. Father, I began, we accept your will and our son's blindness. But Father, we don't accept this. We are asking you, in Jesus' name, to please heal Jesse's heart. It was very simple, but the most heartfelt and honest prayer that we had ever prayed. It was a prayer of desperate faith for desperate days. Letty Coman said the only alternative to desperate faith is despair. We were nearing the point of despair, but praise God for desperate faith. The very next day, I decided to take Jesse to the hospital playroom. Tim took the opportunity to grab a quick lunch at the cafeteria. Jessie was busy at the Lego table and seemed to be having a good time. There was a cute little African-American boy playing with him. He looked long and hard at Jessie's face covered in bandages, and then looking at me, he asked, "Can he see?" I cringed, thinking, not again, let's not bring this up right now. Before I could come up with an appropriate reply, however, Jessie piped up, "Nope, I'm not going to see again, but when I get to heaven, I'm gonna see." I was too stunned to speak, so kept silent. Jessie then turned his head toward me and said, "Mommy, it's okay if I can't see." I sat speechless as he continued playing happily. When his daddy walked into the room 10 minutes later, Jessie immediately said, "Daddy, it's okay if I can't see." It was as if the Lord Jesus himself had entered that playroom and sat down at a Lego table beside a little boy with a sorely wounded heart. I can see him with his arms draped around Jessie's shoulders as he miraculously and in a moment of time granted the sweet release from anger and filled Jessie's heart with acceptance and peace. And from that moment until today, he has never wasted one more moment of sorrow on his blindness. Our all-compassionate God thoroughly and completely healed his heart, and in that instance turned the setback of blindness into a setup for the rest of his life. The next book I read is The Silver Suitcase by Terry Todd, and we are in 1939, and we are following a girl named Cornelia, and she has recently lost her mother, and she is really having a hard time with her faith, and she has decided to journal her thoughts, and this stranger comes to her farmyard, and she has a secret that she is carrying but does not want to tell these people, but will eventually come to tell her, and this secret will come to haunt her for the rest of her life. Many decades later, we follow Cornelia's granddaughter Benita, and her grandmother has actually just passed away, and some other people in Benita's life have just passed away as well, and her husband and herself are really going through an emotional and stressful and financial stressful time, and her husband are thinking about getting a divorce, but she discovers Cornelia's diary and ends up reading it, and this leads her on an unexpected journey, and this was just a book I love so much, and she just gets to read about all the things that her grandmother went through that she didn't know about. The next book I read is The Relentless Encourager, Bringing Life to Others Through What We Say by Matt Halleck and Scott Eichen. So in this book, they just talk about how we can encourage others, why we don't encourage others that much, what's holding us back, how we can grow, and they kind of just answer those questions in the book. The next book I read was Sea Prayer by Khaled Hosseini. This author also wrote The Kite Runner. This is a very short book, someone having to escape their country and the impact that it had on them. The next book I read is A Lullaby for No One's Book by Sajena Popovic, and this is about two people who grew up in an orphanage where the rules were clear. Don't get too close, don't expect kindness, never let anyone see you break. And one of these girls, she found her escape in music, and the guy found his escape through the camera lens. But Look is taken in by a wealthy artist, and then he has to figure out what it means to survive, and if there's anything that anybody at the orphanage can do to help him with what he has been given. The next book I read is Yours Truly, Thomas by Rachel Fordham, and we follow a girl named Penny, and she has worked in the dead letter office for 3 years, and what she does is she opens people's mail who ends up making it to the dead letter office, whether it was through like return to sender, address unknown, all those kind of things. And so one day she opens up this letter, and it was written by Thomas, and it's to his girlfriend. And she reads the letter, and she's like, this love, like, I need to make sure that these two people, like, stay together. So she decides to make it her mission into getting this letter to the original owner. But things don't go as they seem, and then it becomes quite complicated, and that's where the story takes off. And it was a really nice story to read. The next book I read was Divergent by Veronica Roth, and I read the whole series also, so Insurgent and Allegiant as well, and I had never read it before either, and I just found it super fascinating to read this. It's about this girl named Triss, and she has a brother and she has two parents, and she's living in the Amity area, and that's like like the self-sacrificing area, like you do good to others, you knit clothes for the poor, all that kind of stuff. And so when you're 16, you have to choose where you want to go. There's Dauntless, there's Candor, there's your deity, and then there's another one that I don't remember. Her and her brother have to choose which place they want to go to, and we more follow Triss in this story and as how she makes her decision. She can't trust anyone, but yet she is drawn to this person who she desperately wants to trust. And I just found the entire story so interesting. I thought it was going to be similar to the Hunger Games, but it was so different and so interesting that I just loved it. And like Harry Potter, I read the book and then I watched the movie. So I really enjoyed Divergent and I really enjoyed Insurgent. I didn't enjoy Allegiant as much. I thought it was going to be like very different than what it actually was. And then I started watching the movie and I'm like, this does like not match the book at all, and I couldn't get it 15 minutes into it. And so I just stopped watching the movie. But overall, this was a series I really enjoyed. The next book I read is The Lumber Baron's Wife by Lynn Austen. And I always feel like I say the same thing when I read Lynn Austen, but I just love her so much. And she just has this way of presenting the gospel in such a clear way that everybody can understand it and everybody will be like, this is such a clear picture of the gospel. If I want to know Jesus, this is what I need to do, and here's what he did for me. And I feel like I say that with every book, but every book she writes, I just find it to be so true. So in 1873, we are following Hannah, and she has just lost her 3 children because her husband is a doctor and they got sick when he took them to look after some other sick children. So she is grieving with that loss. And there is also a man named Henry, and he is a friend of her husband. And Henry has a lot of money, and he convinces John to move to a different town where doctor skills are really needed. So Hannah and John move there, and once Hannah and John move there, Hannah meets Kate, who is Henry's wife. And Kate is very like la-di-da and immature, and Henry is very like, he wants the best impression, so he asks Hannah to take Kate under her wing and show her all the things. As Hannah does that, Kate confides some stuff to her, and it's clear that not everything is made out as it seems. In present day, we are following Ashley, and she has a degree where she basically can't get a job. She could get a teaching job with it, but she doesn't want it. She really wants to restore old houses. So she ends up in Michigan with her husband. They ended up buying the home of Hannah and John, which was smaller than Kate and Henry's mansion. And so there are people out there that are wanting to restore Henry and Kate's mansion. And so Ashley has the little one, so she's not too far away from this place. So she decides to start working for free because there isn't enough money, and her husband isn't happy about it, and they just bought this big house, so there's some strain there in their marriage. And so they ultimately want to search for the truth because Kate Abernathy went missing in 1873, and they are determined to find out what happened to her in this present day timeline. And like I said, I just loved this book so much. The gospel was presented so clearly, and Lynn Austen just has this phenomenal way of writing and sharing the gospel and just writing stories. The next book I read was The View from Coral Cove by Amy Clipston. So we are following this lady who has just recently broken her engagement, and she has decided to move to Coral Cove to take over her great aunt's toy store because her great aunt has recently passed away. And so while she's cleaning the store up, getting everything set up, there's this girl who's 8 years old named Ashlyn Tanner, and there's a kitten that has wandered into her store. So Ashlyn comes to get this kitten, and then they start up a conversation, and her dad is the veterinarian, and this Ashlyn talks about like her mom and all the stuff that she does for him, and how Brody has had to sacrifice a lot for Ashlyn, and then the three of them, Brody, Ashlyn, and Maya, develop a really nice relationship. So we just follow that relationship over the course of the book, and just the easy and hard and challenging things that they went through, and I really enjoyed this. The next book I read was The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Tutton, and what we follow is Evelyn Hardcastle is going to be murdered at 11 o'clock at night, and there are 8 witnesses, and you have 8 days to figure it out. So each day this man wakes up as a different witness, and so he has to piece together all these clues to eventually find out who killed Evelyn Hardcastle. And if he doesn't do it in 8 days, then he is stuck in this time loop and has to keep figuring it out until he figures it out. The next book I read is As Long as You Need, Permission to Grieve by J.S. Park, and I was at a Christian bookstore 2.5 hours from where I live about a month ago, and I saw this book there, and I'm like, I don't need to buy it even though it was in the sale section. I'm like, it's okay, I'll just get it from the library. So that's what I did. And then as soon as I started reading it, I was like, I also need the ebook because I want to highlight all that kind of stuff. And then I finished reading it, and I'm like, I need a copy of the book. And then as I'm filming this, today is June 8th. I was in Cincinnati last week, and I took a flight to Cincinnati from Saskatoon, which is where the store that this book was in. So then I went to the store and bought the book, and I bought it for $5, and it was on sale for $6, and I got a coupon. So I just really loved this book. I'm gonna read my review, and then I'm gonna read some of the things that stuck out to me. I really appreciated this book, the way the author just truly sees people in their grief and doesn't try to make it better or try to say the right thing. He just sits with them in their grief, pain, and suffering, and that's usually what we need most, is for someone to just sit and be with us. So beautifully written. So the author of this is a hospital chaplain, and so he's had lots of different experiences in the hospital with people who are grieving. It's hard to stay in pain. It's hard to see somebody in pain. So the urge to fix pain is understandable. It's born of charity, our innate need to make right and to rescue. Survival becomes a way of forcefully turning your neck to look away from grief. It's as if grief is some toxic, contagious substance that everybody has to bury as quick as they're dead. We attempt to rush into solution and conclusion and hope because pain is that hard. The lie of letting go is powered by the simple and harmful myth that when we hold our losses closely, somehow we do ourselves more harm. I've seen how harmful it gets when we try to move on so quickly. There is a sprinting to closure, not just with platitudes and bad theology, but by the urgent demand to get you back to top shape, to work mode, to the hustle and grind, to happy smiles, all to quell everyone else's own sense of inconvenience. And this next quote, he is visiting one of his patients in the hospital. I visit Zanaya, my patient with burns, again. The nurse tells me before I enter the room, her family's bedside, and her pastor too. The way the nurse says pastor too turns my spine funny. I enter, and there stands her pastor. He looks at me, then my hair, then my shoes, back to my hair. He says, they make baby chaplains now, huh? Yep, I tell the pastor, they popped me right out of seminary. At that, the room bursts up. One of them even roars laughter from his stomach. I laugh too. I can't help myself. Hearing laughter in a hospital room is always a gift, a hint of green in a desert. But the pastor gives me a look, draws back his lips until they're razors. I get that stare as if I'm a stain he has to bleach. I try to feel bad. I really try. I almost make it. I introduce myself. Zanaya smiles, which I can tell hurts her a bit, and she says, I'm glad you're here. Would you please pray for me? Her pastor twitches like he quietly slipped a disc. So Zanaya adds, we could always use more prayer. Her family, about a dozen people, gather in a circle, standing room only. I'm directly next to her on the right side. The pastor squeezes into my left, almost between me and the bed. He has a smell. I can't pinpoint it, but my guess is starched plaid shirt and years of institutional decay. As always, I ask my patient, what's the biggest thing I can pray about for you right now? I hear a cough. The pastor says, for God to do a miracle. What else? He coughs again on my neck. Zanaya begins to weep. She says, this surgery, it's risky. I don't know. No. Don't worry, the pastor chimes in. He chimes real hard. You trust God. You don't have to cry. You don't have to worry. Just hush now. For a moment, Zanaya was about to say more, that extra bit of release and relief to unearth all that's been buried. But since she closes her mouth and nods at her pastor, I notice the way her breath draws in, the words bit between my teeth, the fear thrown back in her throat, just the briefest breath. I've seen it dozens of times, the way we adjust ourselves out of embarrassment or conformity or the dread that will be seen as a burden, an emotional liability. It's already so much that I'm sick. I don't want to add more to my family. And then he says some more stuff, and then he says, I lean closer. I tell Zanaya, it sounds scary. She lets out a breath she has taken. It is, she says in that breath. It is. She almost says she's scared, but she grips that in the air between us. Her pastor turns his head to me. I glance at him, and he is flexing me the most severe, sour look I've ever seen. And then he says some more, and then he says I start to pray. So that was just a really good reminder for me that we know God is going to be with us in it all, but yet there's still things that we fear, and it's okay to bring those fears to God, and we should allow others to bring those fears to God as well. Speeding through grief always has a cost. To bury somebody's supposed to be is also to bury a story that's untold. When you bury someone's story like that, it gets lodged in the rib cage, it gets radioactive, it festers, it shouts to be heard. Grief is always a voice that needs to speak. If you suppress it, it still speaks, but not always in ways that are healthy. Not in the ways you need. It pushes through your skin like rogue splinters. It's here I found this valuable gift in the middle of grieving. If somebody needs to go to the past to remember something good, that's where I go. If they need a bit of future down the road, I'm going there too. And if they need to stay in the present, even in a terrible loop of their very worst pain, that's where I stay, without turning away. When grief takes us time traveling, dream traveling, and hurls us into sudden memory, it might seem dangerous, even unwanted. But I have found I can trust this grief to tell us what our body needs. Mostly, it is our body trying to rest inside the dream, not to deny loss, but to survive it, to honor it, to find resolve, to keep dreaming. We grieve differently as much as we need differently. 2 phone calls. I tell both of them. Your husband is at the hospital. One screams, drops the phone, picks it back up, asks a dozen questions, stays on while driving. The other is silent, shocked, no noise but the road. Both, I believe, are valid responses. Our bodies cling to what we need to survive the moment, even the smallest plank in the hardest sea. Some say grief has to be not too much and not too little, just enough tears to see you care, but too many, then you have to leave. Controlled, calm, measured, even toned, but if you're numb, then what's wrong with you? No smiling or laughing, or else you don't mean it. Completely somber, no heaving and shouting, and no weird noises. I have wondered if false beauty standards have shaped how we see grieving, as a metric meant to grade our own mortality of sadness, rather than a real visceral reaction that needs to be voiced. From all my years in the hospital, I have seen this. There is no polished, solemn version of grief on a single path. It is just as piercing and jarring, never Hollywood. It is filled with noises and movements you did not know a body could make. It will be extreme or internalized. It is loud or hardly a sound. In some rooms, the grief is almost an embarrassing release, Not everyone has to weep, not right then. Some need to laugh, or eat, or organize, or sleep. All of it, anything and everything is grief, and it is true. I know this. Grief cannot be evaluated or qualified. Everyone grieves the way they will. And just as each of us grieves differently, each of us needs something differently to get us through. The next book I read was The Holocaust by Bullets, a priest's journey to uncover the truth behind the murder of 1.5 million Jews by Patrick Dubois. And this tells us of a story, and this pastor goes to Ukraine to learn about the time during the Holocaust in Ukraine, about the murder of 500,000 Jews, and I just thought this was such a powerful book. And I really read this book because I'm going to Poland this summer, and we are going to be going to some of the sites that were mentioned in this book. The next book I read was Sunday Evenings with Joni, Conversations About Life's Chaos and Amazing Grace by Ruth Shalepi Verboom. So this is about Joni Eareckson Tada, and many years ago, Ruth Shalepi started attending Joni's church, and she asked if there was anything that she could do to help Joni. And Joni said, how about you come over and get me ready for bed on Sunday evenings? So this book is a collection of what this lady Ruth learned from everything that Joni had told her and that they've talked about over the years. So there's just some quotes I want to read. And so this first one, this was during COVID, and Joni had COVID, and so Ruth is asking some questions to Joni. She said, Joni, I'm not sure how to say this, and I do not want to sound rash or inconsiderate, but if I may ask, did you ever so slightly think when you contracted COVID, did you perhaps ask God if this would be it? I guess what I'm asking is, were you happy that this might be it? There was really no polite way of asking, and Joni didn't mind. Not at all. She said, Ruth, I did think of that when I first tested positive, but then I thought of my life and all of the help that I had. It made me think of all the people around the world who have been alone since COVID started, without the help of friends around them. And I realized if I felt so miserable, how much worse must they feel without a savior. There is still so much work to do, so many people who need to hear about Jesus too. This was not what I expected to hear. She had COVID, was weak and tired, and still felt no self-pity, still had eyes for everyone else. This left me puzzled, and I had to think about this and what it meant to me. The weeks flew by, and the following Sunday was a good time for more questions. I was well prepared. Joni, I said, remember last week how I asked you if you wished you had died? And do you remember your answer to me? She nodded. I don't think that way, Joni. I probably should, but honestly, I think it's unfair that you and Ken had COVID. I looked at her, and she looked at me, encouraging me to continue. I would be angry, Joni. You have been through so much, and it would be so easy for God to keep COVID from you. Weren't you, ever so slightly angry with God? She looked at me as if to say, angry with God? Annoyed, at least, I asked. And without judgment, only grace, she said, no, I wasn't. I really wasn't. Ruth, I learned something at the time when I was angry with God. I was angry and disappointed, and I told God. He answered me by teaching me how to pray differently. This was a long time ago, and I learned it early on, and it has helped me ever since. And then she started to explain how she prays 80-20. This is what she means. If a prayer is 100%, Joni divides it into 80 and 20%. 20% of her prayers are for her problem, how difficult it is, how she wishes it to be different, for God to please take it away, whatever, cry it all out. All she wants to say about her problem, she says in the 20%. That's it. With that, he knows how I feel about it, she explained. The other 80% of the prayer is for God. She asks him what he wants, and she listens. She asks him how he feels about it, what he wants to teach her, if there's a verse, if he wants to show her. She asks, how can I be joyful in this, Lord? Will you show me? What do you want me to do? How can I help? What should I pray? Teach me to trust you in this. That's her 80. What nonsense, I thought. There is nothing wrong with my prayer life, but my inner dialogue tried its hardest to keep me away from this 80-20 formula. I don't want to pray like this. I'd like to think that I am a fine prayer warrior, especially when life is difficult. I talk and tell God everything that bothers me. I use so many words, weighty words, to make sure God knows how I feel. 80%, if not more, of my prayer is about me and my problems. Blah, blah, blah. What Joni is telling me is the world upside down. If my prayer is 5 sentences long, I use all 5 to get my point across to God, and He is as if He is hard of hearing or does not already know about my life. If Joni's prayer is 5 sentences long, she uses only 1 sentence for the problem, and all other sentences are for God. And that is all there is. 80-20. God lets you share in His sorrow to identify with His Son, the man of sorrows. That's what pain does to us. It teaches us a deeper level of who Jesus is. God trusts you enough to share in His sorrow, His heartache. He entrusts you to feel His anguish so that you will grow more like Jesus. And then she said some stuff, and then she said, that's why she continues saying, there is more, Ruth. Did you know nothing is by accident with God? Even pain and suffering. They're not randomly happening to us. She reminds me that before anything happens, big or small, God will look at it from all sides. He will decide not only if it may happen, but carefully weighs how far, how deep, and how long it can go. With Him, absolutely nothing happens by mere chance. And then she said, without fully understanding what I just heard, my heart repeats, He trusts me enough. After I broke my neck in that diving accident back in 1967, she answered, I refused to believe I would remain paralyzed. I did everything possible to walk again. It was the focus of my prayers. I worked hard in physical therapy to get back on my feet. I strained mentally to make my fingers move. I straightened up my spiritual act, began reading God's Word more regularly and attending healing services, ready to receive my miracle. I prayed more earnestly, thinking that surely God wouldn't ignore the prayers of someone who's trying so hard to please Him. Ruth, she continued, can you imagine how disappointed I was when years later my hands and feet were still limp and useless? I nodded. Yes, I can. I tried so hard, she said, and says in Psalm 84 that God withholds no good things from those whose walk is blameless. So why are you withholding my healing? I asked him so many times. I did not understand. God promised to not withhold any good thing, and for me, walking was a good thing. And Matthew says that God will give good gifts to those who walk with Him. What could be a better gift than walking, right? But then, I'll never forget this. One day, a friend said to me, Joni, I want you to know that I think you're awfully courageous. I mean, I've been looking at you and I don't know. Your smile in that wheelchair, it assures me that God is going to help me get through my problems, and I thank you for that. I don't know, Ruth, but it just hit me. It resonated. Something told me that this, she pointed to her legs, was God's good thing. I realized God wasn't so much interested in healing my legs, but in healing my heart. And I still believe God is always interested in our physical well-being for sure. But He is far more interested in our spiritual well-being. He wants a deeper healing. Over the decades, I have come to highly value things like bravery in the face of suffering. The next book I read was Tastemakers, 7 Immigrant Women Who Revolutionized Food in America by Mei Yuk Sen. This is just a story of 8 incredible women who are all immigrants who left an incredible mark on the way that Americans eat today. The next book I read was The Orphan Collector by Ellen Marie Wiseman, and we are in 1918 in Philadelphia, and we follow a German immigrant family, and we are following the end of the war, but the very beginning of the Spanish flu where lots of people die. So we follow Pia and her mother, and Pia has 2 twin brothers. I think they're around 9 months old, and Pia's family ends up getting very sick, and her mom passes away, and so Pia is desperate to go out and look for food because there's no food at home. So in desperation, she leaves her 2 brothers at home, and she goes out and looks for food. And while she is out looking for food, she ends up getting sick and going to the hospital. And then she tries to go home and find her brothers, but they aren't there. And so Pia then ends up at an orphanage. And Pia is determined to find out what happened to her brothers. Now, what Pia doesn't know is there's this neighbor lady named Bernice. And Bernice has just recently lost her baby from the Spanish flu. And Bernice sees Pia going out to, like, she thinks Pia's abandoning her brothers. So Pia ends up accidentally leaving the door to her apartment unlocked, and Bernice is like, why did Pia leave, kind of thing. So she goes and checks it out, and Bernice finds that Pia's mom is dead and that her two brothers, baby brothers, are still there. And so Bernice thinks Pia is like a horrible sister. Why would you abandon all these people, or your brothers? And so she decides to take the babies as her own. And she thinks that Pia has either run away or that she's eventually going to come back, and people out there know that she only has one baby. So then Bernice decides to move somewhere where nobody knows her so she can say that these are both her babies. And it's really interesting to watch how Pia and Bernice, how their stories connect throughout the story. And it was a really interesting read, and I enjoyed it. The next book I read was On the Cliffs of Foxglove Manor by Jamie Jo Wright. And so we are in 1885, and Adria has been sent to Foxglove Manor because there is something that her father would like her to recover. And she basically sees this as a punishment because Adria did not want to live anymore, and she was unsuccessful with her attempt. And so she has what her ultimate job is there is to be a companion to the maid, not the maid, a companion to the woman who lives at this manor. But her ultimate goal from her dad is to find this thing, and she is not welcome home without it. So we follow that story, and then we follow Kaylee in present day, who gets a job at Foxglove Manor, which has now been turned into a nursing home. And what happens when she was really young was she was kidnapped, and it really affected her brother, and her brother has autism, and that seems to be all he can focus on. So she takes this job in hopes of reconciling what happened all those years ago and having to confront the past and everything that came along with that. And I really enjoyed this book. It was a really great story. The next book I read, and the final book I read, is Theo of Golden by Alan Levi. This is a book about a man named Theo, and he just shows up in this random town one day. I don't remember where it is, somewhere in the States, but he goes to this coffee shop, and at this coffee shop there has been an artist who has taken pictures of people and then have drawn them on paper, I guess, and then put them up on the walls to display and have them for sale. So what Theo has decided to do is he's really fascinated by these paintings or these drawings, and so he has decided to buy every painting or drawing, not all at once, but just as time goes along, and gift it to the person who it is the drawing of. So we just get to experience this really sweet story of Theo just being so generous and just following Theo and his time in this little place. And I just love this story so much, and it was just such a joy to read this book. So like I said, that's the end of my, I think, 36 books I had to talk about. If you counted, I did not talk about all 36 because 6 of them were Harry Potter books, and I kind of did that all in one, and then 3 of them were Divergent books, and so I did that all in one. And so I also wanted to talk about the reading challenges that I did in April and May. So for the Read Your Bookshelf Challenge by Chantel Reads All Day, I had to read a word with the conjunction in the title, and for that I read What's Mine and Yours by Naima Coaster. And then in May, I had to include a place, so I read The View from Coral Cove by Amy Clipston. For the Buzz Wordathon, hosted by Books and Lala, for April, I had to read a book with ordinal numbers, so I read The Second Woman. And May, I had to read a book that had make in the title, so I read Tastemakers by Mayuk Sun. For the Buzzword Cover Challenge, by Books and Lala, I had to read a book for April with accessories on the cover, so I read In the Shadow of the Sun King by Golden Keyes Parsons. And in May, I had to read a book that had a border on the cover, and so I read The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Tutton. Then I did a challenge from the 52 Book Club group. It was called the April Mini Challenge, and there were 3 prompts, and so the first one I read was the author's photo. She had to be smiling with teeth. So I read The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kumali, and then I had to read Knock Knock Who's There. So you could answer it like knock knock, and then the book title could be like saying who's there. So I read Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling, and then I had to read a rhymeless word in the title, and I read The Silver Suitcase by Terry Todd, and the rhymeless word that was okayed by Google was silver. And then I also just wanted to talk to you about my Bible study and the books of the Bible that I read, because ultimately that's the most important thing that you can read. And if you haven't read it, I would encourage you to read it. And if you don't know where to start, I would encourage you to start in John. But I finished reading the Old Testament, not completely, but in 4 days. Today's June 8th, I'll be finished the Old Testament, so I'm just wrapping that up as I go. And then the parts or the books that I studied more in depth were Isaiah, Psalms, 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, Nahum, Zephaniah, and Jeremiah. And so it was mainly just parts of those, not all of them, but just parts of those books. And I thank you for watching this video, and I would love to hear some of your recent reads down below in the comments, so feel free to leave some of those or any recommendations you have, and thanks for watching!